Welcome to our show, Meaning and Motivation, where we explore the many ways we make meaning together and why we do what we do, our motivation. I'm your host, Tim Thompson, and with us today is Dr. Elliot Wreh-Wilson. He's the retiring chair of Edinboro University's philosophy department, and welcome, Elliot.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
All right, well, I'm glad you're here, and you are from Liberia.
Yes, I'm from Liberia,
originally.
West Africa.
West Africa.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about Liberia?
Well, it was founded in the early 1920s by returning slaves from the United States. But it's a relatively small country. I will say the size of Maryland or Virginia, 43,000 square miles, they say. And it's generally a tribal society, but the free slaves, their children are also there. They don't belong to that tribal system. And the people call them Americo-Liberians, but they are Liberians because they settled the country and actually founded the country. For the first 100 years, they ruled the country. And then there was a coup d'etat in 1980. The charges were corruption. That government has since been overthrown, and we've elected a new government in Liberia headed by the first woman president in Africa. So Liberia is doing okay.
Wonderful. So things are progressing. But
yes,
that's a lot to unpack there. Liberia was founded by former slaves who went over from the U.S., but there had been people there already existing, right?
Right.
Okay.
I probably misspoke at the beginning. It's in the 1800s.
In the 1800s.
1816, 1818, 1821.
Oh, when it was founded?
When it was founded in the 1800s. Yeah. I thought I said 1900s.
Yeah.
Actually in the 1800s. And we got our independence, we declared independence in 1847. 1847. Supposedly from the American Colonization Society. Not from the United States, but the American Colonization Society, which founded Liberia.
Right. Okay, it founded Liberia,
yeah.
And then Liberia declared independence from the American Colonization Society.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before the former slaves who founded Liberia went over there, had Liberia been colonized?
No. It was an assembly of tribal groups that sort of supervise themselves. They were chiefdoms, they call them. Every group had a chief. Mm-hmm. So there was these assorted chiefdoms that were administered by chiefs, not by presidents, not by kings. And the British and the French who were in the area did not recognize that piece of land as a country or a nation. And so when the Colonization Society from here wanted land in Africa to repatriate free slaves, they decided Liberia would be the place. It was not called Liberia at the time. It was called the Green Coast. Mm-hmm. And then it became Liberia. And then they founded their capital after your president, James Monroe. So the capital became Monrovia. Okay. James Monroe was president when they settled that part of the place, I guess.
And is that still the case? Is
yes,
it still Monrovia?
Monrovia is still the capital.
Mm-hmm. And it's on the west coast.
On the west coast. It's between the Ivory Coast and Sierra Leone on the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
And Guinea is to the north of Liberia. So we are enclaved in between three countries.
Are you right near the equator or right on? Or
the equator is below Liberia. I've forgotten my geography,
but
I could tell you
close by.
Yeah. We're not too far from the equator.
It gets warm.
Yes, very warm.
Yeah.
Normal temperature is in the 80s, high 80s. That's normal temperature.
Yeah.
When it's in the 70s, that's considered low. If it's in the 60s, if it ever gets to the 60s, that's considered very, very cold for the people there. Yeah.
Now, you grew up there. You were born and raised. What was it like to grow up in Liberia?
Well, I was born in one of the poorest parts of the country. This is the farthest end of the country from the capital, not too far from the border with the Ivory Coast. My father left the village and moved to a place called Kipamos to go to school. Then his father passed away, and there was no assistance coming from home, so he sought a job with the local American company. There's a rubber company called Firestone, and so he worked for Firestone. I was born in Firestone, Maryland County in Liberia. It was easier to go to the Ivory Coast than to go to Monrovia. I could go to the Ivory Coast in 4 hours by land. We would walk there. But you couldn't walk to Monrovia. That was impossible. By car, from where I was born to the Ivory Coast would be about 1 hour. But by land, we'll do it in 4 hours by foot.
Right.
We did it usually.
Why couldn't you go to Monrovia?
Well, it was too far. Monrovia by land would be over 350 miles. You couldn't do that. Yeah.
Did you have to go there to the Ivory Coast to go to school?
Well, no, I didn't have to go to school there. I went to school where I was born. But Ivory Coast had things that we needed. For example, shopping. You could go across the river to shop and to see people that you knew. Some of the people there were family. So we went to the Ivory Coast. And it was fun. They spoke French. That was kind of strange to us.
Right.
And so we picked up words here and there. We learned how to say bonjour, for example. Ça va? Oui, ça va. How you doing? I'm fine. How you doing?
Yeah. Now, your Liberia was English speaking.
Yeah, English speaking. You can get my accent. Liberia, we have our own unique, peculiar Liberian accent. And we speak a kind of English, let's call it pidgin English. It's English with a Liberian twang. And expats will find it difficult to follow, but after a while you'll know what we're saying. In other words, we mix English with tribal words, for example. If somebody was ugly, I wouldn't say you're ugly, I'd say you were war. War is a tribal word for not beautiful. So I wouldn't say you're ugly, I'd say you were war.
Right.
So that's Liberian
Put it in kind
English.
terms,
Yes, that's Liberian English. If we played soccer and you were terrible at soccer, we say you're fisi. Fisi is a word for a poor player or a bad player. So I wouldn't say you're a bad player, I'd say you're fisi. So, and around Liberia, that's how we speak.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like you, as part of the culture, you will be nasty to other people or sarcastic or cutting.
No, no. In fact, people are very nice to one another, very friendly place. People speak to one another. Here, people do speak. Some people just don't speak. There, everybody speaks. Everybody wears a smile.
Yeah. Good. Well, and what are they smiling about?
Well, they just smile. It's a cultural thing. And you'll be puzzled by that. Like you say, what are they smiling about? Right. Nothing. They just smile. They have a small grin on their face. Right. No use frowning.
Yeah.
I guess that's the idea. It's better to make somebody feel good when you're smiling than when you're not smiling. Right. People feel welcome when you're smiling than when you're not smiling, I guess. So culturally, that's what we do.
Is it a nice place to visit?
Yes, it's a very nice place to visit. The capital is a rough place. It's full of people. It's congested. But outside the capital is beautiful. It's like around here in the country. It's open. The people are friendly. They're nice. They're welcoming. The city, people are nice. They're welcoming. But like any big city, you have to put up with different characters from time to time. So.
Right, so they probably has the dangerous pockets. And
yes. Yeah.
Now, Liberia's been through quite a lot over the last 20 or 30 years or so. What kinds of changes have gone on there? You mentioned.
Well, The new president, this is one thing she's done that most people appreciate very much. She's maintained the peace. We have not gone back to war. I think part of the reason for that is that the United Nations has been there, and the U.S. has been supportive of this woman. You know, she won the Nobel Prize some time back. That's precisely why. I mean, people thought we would go back to war, given the fact that there were so many warring factions in the country. She was able to bring them together, integrate them into the government, and so there's some semblance of peace. I don't think they want to go back to war. I'm not ruling that out, but you know, they're human beings. They could get upset about something and go back to war. I don't see that happening in the near future, especially with this woman. When you receive a Nobel Prize and you are a friend of the United States, you tend to think about those things. They weigh on your mind, and you try to do your best. So she's doing her best. It's not perfect, but she's doing her very best to maintain the peace.
That seems like a pattern throughout the former colonial Africa, that once they get independence, that there have been warring tribes or groups who have moved in. And
what the problem is that resources are scarce, and when a government is in there and they monopolize power, they monopolize resources, you can imagine people getting not too happy about that. When you leave large swaths of the people out of the economic life of the country, there will be, what's the word?
Unrest.
Unrest, despair. And that can translate into violence. And that's what happened. The previous government, it was a popular uprising. They came in, but then they kind of settled down, and they became autocratic. They went after anybody who criticized them. They began imprisoning people.
Similar to what happened in Zimbabwe and other places?
Right, that sort of thing. And many of the educated people had to flee the country. Many of the wealthy people had to flee the country. And as they fled, they left their property behind. So they organized, and they decided they were coming back. And so Mr. Charles Taylor was one of them. In fact, he served in that government and was fired, supposedly for corruption. That's what we were told. He came back here to the United States and regrouped, and came back and organized a rebellion against the government, which was overthrown. It's about resources. When people have something to eat, and their children can play freely, and their children can be happy, they're happy. But if the children can't find food, and they can't find a clinic to go to, they're not going to be happy about it. No matter who you are as president, they're not going to be happy about it. So it's about providing the basics and allowing freedom around the country. I mean, people want to farm, and they don't want people, forcing them to farm. And they want to be able to sell their goods. And if they can't sell their goods, then they can't make money. And then they can feed their families. If they can't feed their families, they're not going to be too happy. And so when the rebels came, people sided with the rebels.
Right. But then those rebels just kind of turned sour after
They
having
turned
power.
on the very people they were supposed to liberate. And that's why we had the problem we had. So there were factions of the rebel group that broke off from the main group, and they began fighting the main group, and then there was another group that broke off. So we had these various factions fighting one another for power.
Those factions didn't have anything to do with, like you said, the Americo.
No, the divisions in the country about Native and Americo-Liberian was not the reason for the war. It was not the reason for the war. It appeared to have been the reason for the war. It probably was a motivation for the original coup d'etat. The government at the time was dominated by Americo-Liberians. For over 100 years, the government of Liberia was dominated by Americo-Liberians. The coup d'etat replaced the Americo-Liberian, whatever word they used to describe regime, or whatever you want to call it. But then these natives came in, and they went wild. They went almost crazy, to the point where even the natives didn't want them in there. And Charles Taylor, who happens to be an Americo-Liberian, was supported by the natives. So it wasn't a native versus Americo-Liberian war. It was people wanting their freedom again.
Right. Yeah. And people who had gained power wanted to hold on to it and were doing certain things to maintain
wanted
it.
to hold on to power.
Now, when you left and came to the U.S., did you come right to the U.S. from
Liberia?
Yes,
I came from Monrovia. I was a teacher at the University of Liberia. I won a Fulbright scholarship, and I came to Boston University. I was there. I came in August of '88. By the end of '89, Mr. Taylor's group had entered the country with the express purpose of overthrowing the government. And between '89 and, I would say, 2002, 2003, there was hell on earth in Liberia.
Right.
Yeah.
That was when Taylor went in to try and overthrow the government.
Yes.
They did overthrow the government?
They did overthrow. In fact, they did within a year. Within a year. The sitting president was assassinated in 1990.
Okay.
This is a year after they got in.
Right.
But then there were these internal strifes among the rebels. Taylor's group, there were these, I guess they weren't too happy with Mr. Taylor, so they began to fight him. And so things went upside down in the country. I think you know this, over 200,000 people lost their lives in that war.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as I told you, many of the young people who fought in the war have been left behind, not just by this government, but by Taylor's government, and they have no hope. The president has been trying. She's created some community colleges where hopefully these young people can be assimilated to acquire basic skills, but it's not working out the way I think she intended it. The idea was they would go to these community colleges, stay 2 years, acquire skills, and then get out. But not all of them can go to community college because most of them have never gone to school. They can't read, they can't write. So how do you send somebody to a community college when he can read, when he can write?
Right. And did the educational system, with all the strife during the 90s, did the educational system suffer? Did
it suffered
people
a lot.
like get pushed into the military?
Well, I think they shut down all the schools for a period of about 4 or 5 years. The United Nations came in, and then they tried to revive the educational system. But it's been very weak it was very weak for a long time until this new president came in. She's been working hard to find some money to restart the system or reboot the system, whatever word you like there. My particular interest there concerns those young people who actually fought in the war, who have never been to school, who therefore can go to community college.
Right.
Where you're required to be at least literate to enter.
So you're planning to go back,
Yep.
if you can, and is that part of what you want to do,
Well,
work on literacy?
If I can get the support that I would be looking for, not to work on literacy, but to work on helping young people acquire basic skills that don't require literacy. I mean, you don't need to be able to read a book or write a poem in order to be able to lay a brick or paint a house or move something from here to there or dig a well, for example.
Right.
or lay a pipe in the ground. I mean, you can have a supervisor who can read and write. He can, supervise young people who have basic skills in putting pipes together or roofing a house, those kinds of things. I don't think they require literacy skills. Somehow, most people tend to believe that until you're literate, you will not be able to do those kinds of things. I don't think so.
You can apprentice at various things.
Yeah. I learned how to tie my shoes without going to college, So you don't need to be able to read and write to tie your shoes. That's what I'm saying. That you can teach somebody to lay brakes. Look, we have Mexicans who come all the way from Mexico into the United States who do odd jobs in this country. They're not literate, most of them. They might be literate in Spanish, but they don't read and write English, yet they can do basic things here. They understand English, and that's all they would need. So if you needed somebody to paint a building, you can teach them how to paint. And those skills can be acquired in 2-3 months.
Is that something that the president of Liberia is working on along with the push for community colleges, like to develop those skills, or is that something?
This is her intention, that the community college will serve this purpose. I've been to Monrovia. I've been to Liberia. I've been there 2 separate times, and I've seen what's happening. I know, for example, that the colleges are there, they're doing well, and they cater to young people who have gone through the high school system. But there are young people who never went to high school. This is the group I'm interested in. They will not be able to go back to high school. They're already in their 30s. How do you send a 31-year, 32-year-old man to high school?
Right. And these are people who have been devastated by the war, and continue to be.
Continue to be. They're there. The word you use to describe them would be hopelessness. I mean, they have no chance of landing a job because they have no skills. But then they can't enter community college because the community college will say, well, you have to be able to read and write. My point is, they understand Liberian English. Why don't you teach them basic skills using Liberian English without requiring them to be able to read and write? I don't think that's necessary to make a living. You don't have to be able to speak English and write English to make a living. My grandfather never spoke English. He never wrote English. He made a living. He had a basic skill. He was a fisherman. So we can teach people how to fish. This is what I'm getting at. We can teach people how to farm without sending them to a community college where one important requirement is that they learn how to read and write English.
Now, are there things about their situation now, like in order to teach them to fish or to farm, that are stopping them from doing that, certain impediments in the system? Like, for instance, are many of them caught within slums inside the city that they can't really
They live
get?
in slums, and nobody's going to hire them because they are perceived as having no skills. In most cases, they're viewed as troublemakers. I don't view them in that light. I think they're just people who need some help. You provide a place for them to come to learn something like painting. It doesn't have to take 6 months because they have to make a living. These are boys who work, on the local market. They sell stuff. You might be selling jackets, for example, and they say, can I go around and sell your jackets for you? And at the end of the day, you pay me $5. So he'll sell the jackets for you, and he'll bring you back your money, and you pay him his $5. That's the sort of thing to do. But that sort of thing can support a family. And some of them already have families. Right. My point is, I hope you're following me. There are community colleges that the president has started, and I commend her for that. But there are people who aren't fit to go to community college. Right. So what do you do about them?
Now, even if you train them to fish or to farm or whatever skills you're going to give them, is there an economy that can support that, that can give them a job?
Right. And that's precisely why I want to do this. Business people in the country, I know 2 Germans who work inside the country. One of them has a construction business. And I say to him, well, Eric, so what's the deal? How come you don't have Liberians working here? He said, well, you can't teach them. So, I have to teach them, but they can't learn. They're not able to learn. Mm-hmm. In other words, Eric wants them to be able to understand English the way you and I understand English. That's not going to work. Right. He thinks it would cost him a lot of money to train these people, which is true. So people like me, maybe, and there are people on the ground already doing this at a low scale, I say we can get on the ground and say, hey, let's move heaven and earth to find opportunities for these young people to acquire these basic skills. If a boy says, I want to be a painter, I don't mean the Picasso kind of painting. I mean to paint a building in and out. Let's teach him how to do it without requiring him to learn English. Because requiring somebody to learn English takes time, 2-3 years. Right. He's already 33.
So is there even the motivation to do that?
That's what I'm saying. He's not going to come. He's not going to show up because it's a waste of time for him. It takes a lot of time to go to class to master English. Right. So why not just say, look, all you need 2 months here to learn how to paint, to learn how to lay bricks, to learn how to do X, Y, and Z. Right. And you can get an entry-level job.
So that's really establishing kind of a new sidebar to the educational system to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. And will you have to form relationships with government and business and others in order to?
That would be the challenge that I have. I have to be able to make as many friends as I can make. Reach out to business, private people, and possibly to government, hopefully. And I think the president, this is something she's been working on. The way she approached it was one way. I say the way you put it is an additional way of doing it. This is a different way. This is one other way in addition to what she's doing. I'm not saying we get rid of the community colleges.
This might even be able to be part of the community colleges.
They could be separate from or become part of the community colleges, so that maybe we can revise the curriculum of the community college so that people can come in for 6 months, not do 2 years where they have to have an associate's degree. They don't need an associate's degree to go to work. They can get a certificate. So after 4 months of apprenticeship at the community college, they can move out. Or 4 months of apprenticeship with a business, they can move out and find a job. Right. That's what I have in mind.
It sounds like kind of coming from some kind of deep well of morality or moral concern that you have, and you taught philosophy. Does your teaching somehow weave into your life and your interests here?
Well, my life goes back to seminary. I began in a seminary, in a Catholic seminary. I was going to become a priest. I stayed 5 years in the seminary before I branched up to philosophy. So this was going to be my life, working with poor people in the villages. Teaching has taken me in a different direction. In particular, being here in the States, we're confined to the university, teaching, going to conferences and writing. That's what we do. We're not involved in the community. Now that I've reached the age when I can retire, I think I can go back to that thing which motivated me as a young man many, many years ago when I went to seminary. I don't see it as a moral thing as much as I see it as a human thing. This is what human beings do. You look at the less fortunate, the less privileged, those who've been left behind, and you reach back to them and say, how might we be of help? How can we be of help? And if there are no responses, then you say, well, is there one way we can help you? Say, well, we're offering a course for bricklaying. Is that what you want to do? We're offering a course for, roofing. You want to be a roofer. So we have a place where you can go if you want to roof houses, or if you want to lay bricks, or if you want to paint, or you want to lay pipes, or you want to do electric wiring, that sort of thing. So we can provide these different options, and they can buy into it and do whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them do other things. They mostly sell stuff, but not everybody can sell. So you go to the city, everybody is selling something. Mm-hmm. That's not going to work in the long run. When people get older, they can't keep selling stuff. Mm-hmm. But they need something that can, make money, like roofing, like bricklaying, like pipe laying.
Right.
Something they can go back to.
These people, the majority of them are not the people who went through the educational system, right?
No.
They didn't go to elementary or high school.
These are the people who never went to elementary school. Mm-hmm. They were boy soldiers. Mm-hmm. 7 years old, they joined the army. They were forced to join the army. They stayed in the army for 12 years. So when you're 8 years old, 8 and 12 years old of war, so you're 22 when the war is over, and you are unemployable. By any measure, you're useless to the economy. I'm saying we can make them useful again.
Do you find that people go underground, that there's an underground economy or black market or other things going on that help sustain them?
Those are the people who, for lack of a better word, who go into the black market, who go into the underground economy. These are the people who subscribe to anything you throw at them. For example, drug dealing, for example. Mm-hmm. These are the people who do it because there's no other way to make a living. Some of these people have families. They have families. And how else do they make a living?
You got to do whatever.
You got to do whatever it takes. Whether as a criminal or as a legitimate employee of somebody. Mm-hmm. So if nobody's going to hire you, how do you make a living?
Are there drug problems there as elsewhere?
It's a minor problem. It's a nuisance. But I think we can cope with it in Liberia. The problem is unemployment. And the president has been talking about it, and she's been worried about the educational system. Recently, she had to fire a lot of people from the Ministry of Education because she said they weren't doing these things. My thing is, no matter who you put there, it has to be the ideas. They have to come with some certain ideas. Mm-hmm. That's how the ministry works. When these people get into the bureaucracy forces you to become a bureaucrat.
Right. That's the problem.
That's what the bureaucracy does. Now,
but here's the structure of everything, post-war and everything's decimated and everything. And here's this structure that you're going to be put into. Yeah. And
so the person at the top has to have some kind of a vision that says, look, I understand that the traditional educational system works, but we'll have to have a two-tier system. Mm. So people who go through the traditional system and people who go through the non-traditional route, the route I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good.
Because people have to make a living. That's what I'm saying, Tim.
Right.
They have to make a living or they become criminals.
Right.
And we don't want that.
Well, you've made quite a living, and I didn't even realize that about you, that you were in seminary. Everything.
Yes, I began in seminary. I got my first degree from seminary in philosophy. Then I became a teaching assistant at the University of Liberia. Then I contacted colleges here in the United States, and Boston College was happy to offer me a tuition waiver, which I took advantage of, and I went to Boston and I got a master's degree, and then I went back home. I gave some time to the university, and then I heard about a Fulbright grant that was being advertised. We had to compete for it, and I won one of the grants, and then I went to Boston University. I was supposed to go back, but then the war was raging, so I couldn't go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, I didn't become a priest. But
coming right out of Boston University, that was when the war was going on, and that's
right.
Did you come here direct from there, or?
Well, from Boston University, I came here. I had a teaching job at a community college near Boston called Middlesex Community College. I taught mostly ethics courses. They had a business ethics class, which I taught, and an ethics and society class they wanted somebody to teach. So I taught those two for about 3 years before moving here.
Now, on that, push for teaching ethics, and especially ethics in business, it seems like, for years, especially through all the scandals and problems and everything, that's been a big push. Do you see that landscape changing at all? Or will it always be a problem?
I think there will always be a problem. We're human beings. We like to go back to what we're comfortable doing, despite what we know about ethics and morality. Business people are doing okay these days. They do have workshops and seminars for their employees to avoid certain excesses. I guess that's the best we can do. People aren't going to become perfect, but they can avoid excessive behavior. Conflict of interest is a problem in any society, but to the extent that we can minimize it, to the extent that people are aware of the unethicalness of conflict of interest or the illegality of it, I think we'll be making progress. So I know people in the business department don't like the word business and ethics paired together, but it makes sense to somebody like me that business students should be made aware of the relevance of ethics in their personal and business lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something that you teach ethics.
Yes, I teach ethics. I used to teach the business ethics course here. Mm-hmm. We hired somebody who can do it, so I gave that over to him, so he's doing it. I did it for a long, long time here.
Right. Yeah. But that's part of the fiber of philosophy, isn't morality and ethics,
yes,
and what is the good life, right?
Right.
And after years of teaching philosophy, what is the good life?
Well, let's put it this way. Bertrand Russell put it well for me. He says we have beliefs, we hold beliefs, and some of those beliefs are wrong, some are right. What we do in philosophy is to help people to see that whatever they believe, they can try to minimize the errors in their beliefs. So the fewer errors we have regarding our beliefs, the better off we are. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. Today in this country, there's a fuss about same-sex marriage. And when you ask people, why not? They'll quote maybe Leviticus and say it's an abomination. And you say, what makes it an abomination? They can't explain it. They don't know. They just repeat that word because it's in the Bible. You say, well, then they might say, well, it's unnatural. And then you say, well, okay, let's assume it's unnatural. What other things are unnatural that we human beings do? And then they go through a list of things that are unnatural. And then we say, well, do we forbid those things in our law? That is, we say this thing is unnatural. For example, I don't know, flying is unnatural for human beings, but we do get in jets and fly. Mm-hmm. We don't ban flying because flying will be unnatural, do we? We don't.
Right. Right.
Why ban something legally because we believe it's unnatural? There are other things that are unnatural. Getting sick is unnatural. Is it natural to be sick? Mm-hmm. We don't ban sickness. It's just an unnatural thing that happens. I'm saying, assuming we believe the gay lifestyle, gay sex is unnatural. Let's say we believe it. Yeah, that's something we believe. That doesn't force us to pass laws that say, thou shalt not be gay. How do you pass a law that says, thou shalt not be gay? He's already gay. Mm-hmm. And he wants to get married. In my mind, yeah, I may not be comfortable with it, but there are things I'm not comfortable with.
So your job was to what? To show people the inconsistencies in their internal logic, or?
Well, that's the wrong way to approach philosophy. Once you begin to show people the inconsistencies of their position, they will not want to hear you. Mm-hmm. They will tune you out. That's what they're going to do. What you want to do is to help people to see, to understand their beliefs. You know, look, take the whole idea that God exists. I can prove that God exists as a philosopher better than most preachers I know. They can't prove to anybody that God exists. They just say it. And somebody says, how do you know?
Can you, in like 20 seconds, tell me how you would prove that God exists? I mean,
it can't be done in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
It takes a course.
Oh, okay.
It takes a course.
I'm going to take that course.
Yeah, it takes a course. But you have to help people to understand. Well, look, there are things people do. We human beings, we just look around you. Take motion. Thomas Aquinas proved the existence of God from motion. What's the cause of motion? The first mover. What was the first mover? It's not something that was moved by anybody. And so he inferred it had to be an unmoved mover. And that unmoved mover we call God. In other words, we're doing to concepts what physics is doing about objects. Physics is trying to find the best way possible to explain the existence of physical things. We're trying to explain concepts, the best way to understand them, to approach them, and to use them. And we use different philosophers to help people do that. That's why we do those different philosophers. It's not because we want to bore students.
Right.
It's just that those philosophers are difficult to read.
Right.
And my job is to simplify them.
Right. Interpret. And,
Yes.
And, make it accessible to people.
Fine. That's what I do.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, you're about to talk about getting off into the good life. You're retiring now, and you have a wonderful family, and you have a son who is now a pro football player, just graduated from school. So how's life?
Well, life is good. When the children grow up, then life is good. You were asking about a good life. That's what it's about. It's about having opportunities and making the best of those opportunities. And making sure that your children and the people in your life have opportunities to succeed. That your students have a chance at a good life, whatever that life is, whatever they choose as the good life. There's no one good life. You know, some want to be business majors, some want to be communications majors. So they do the best at their jobs. If they can do the best at their jobs and succeed, that's the good life for me. Now, if you were to ask St. Augustine, he would say, is knowing God. See? But then Aristotle would say, well, what's the significance of knowing God? Why do we want to know God? That makes us happy. So if it makes us happy, that's the good life. If knowing God, loving God, serving God makes you happy, that's the good life. For some people, it's making money. If it makes you happy, that's the good life. For some people, it's having a good friend. If that makes you happy, that's the good life.
So it just comes down to your individual.
That's it.
You know, what is God for you? And
well, you cause conflict when you try to force the good life down other people's throats. This is the good life for you. You must see it this way, or I'll kill you. Bin Laden thinks we all have to become Muslims. Well, that's how he sees it, but he's wrong. You can be a Muslim, that's the good life. That makes you happy. You can be a Buddhist. You can even be an atheist. If that makes you happy, that's the good life for you. It may not be for me or for you, but that's the good life for him. Now, we're not going to go around beating up people because they don't see it the way we see it. I don't have to see it the way people see it. They don't have to see it the way I see it. This is how I live. This is how you live. This is how she lives. This is how this person lives.
Then, of course, we get into the problems of when the way I live interferes with the way you live. Yeah. And
it simply means that you have a faulty notion of the best way to live. When the way you live is interfering with the way other people live, then you better check yourself, not those people.
I better go read John Stuart Mill.
There you go. See?
Elliot Wreh-Wilson, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you,
And
Tim.
really good luck with you, all you're going to do and your trips back to Liberia, and I hope you're successful in establishing those programs.
Yeah. And Edinboro University was good to me. So
bet.
I will always call this place home.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And you'll be staying here for a while.
Yep, yep.
Very good. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
It was a pleasure.
Yep.